By early 1944, the Allied High Command was grappling with a formidable challenge: how to breach the Atlantic Wall, the fortified coastal defenses erected by Nazi Germany. The Pas de Calais, the shortest distance across the English Channel, was initially the most obvious target. It was the logical choice given its proximity to England. However, German intelligence and fortifications were concentrated there. The risk of catastrophic casualties was immense. A growing body of intelligence, much of it derived from the code-breaking success of Bletchley Park, painted a different picture. Ultra, as the intelligence operation was codenamed, indicated that the Germans were convinced the main attack would come at Calais. This offered a tantalizing opportunity, a deception operation, a ghost army, as many would come to know it, to draw German forces away from a more vulnerable location. Normandy, while farther and with more challenging beaches, presented a potential opening. It was less heavily fortified than Calais, and its geography offered certain tactical advantages. However, the decision was far from straightforward. The success of the invasion hinged on a complex interplay of factors: weather, tides, naval firepower, air superiority, and crucially, surprise. Ultimately, General Dwight D. Eisenhower made the decision to invade Normandy. It was a gamble, but one that, with meticulous planning and execution, would change the course of the war.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jenn.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. Now, Jenn, before we kick off the podcast today, I want to remind folks, some of our regular listeners, that they can reach out to us and now have a conversation with us about these episodes over at thehistoryroadtrip.com. We had talked a little bit about what we're going to do over there, and I've tried some things out, decided to reel some things in, but I want to continue the efforts over there and make that a place for us to be able to have a conversation with our listeners. If you guys want to comment on a podcast, if you have a question about a podcast, you can go to thehistoryroadtrip.com, and there's a chat area on the website or in the app that you can get for completely free. We're not going to do any premium podcasts over there right now. We might have occasional audio extras over there that we're going to talk a little bit more about travel stuff at the History Road Trip, but that's just another product for us to be able to dive even deeper and tell some extra stories about some of these subjects, because there's so much to what we talk about. There's so much about these events and these locations that we really just can't cover it all in a video or a podcast. And the newsletter over at thehistoryroadtrip.com is another avenue for us to do that.
We want to make this very interactive. If you're traveling and you want to go somewhere and you're wondering, did anybody go there? Not only do I want to know the history, I want to know where to stay, where to eat, what to do. We're going to add those to the end of the podcast because we found like that's very important for people who want to have a history road trip.
Yeah. And if you are interested in those resources, the newsletter, the History Road Trip, is going to be where we add those Google Maps links and locations. It's something that I've played with for a while. So go check that out. It's completely free. It's just a newsletter. I won't email you more than once a week. And it'll pop up in your inbox. I'll include some interesting stories about our adventures that we've hadn't had a chance to talk about, maybe some interesting anecdotes about our historical topics. And there's also free travel resources for you if you ever want to go visit these places. All right, so today we're continuing our Normandy topic. And you're going to talk a little bit about Utah Beach, which is one of the beaches that you got to spend a little bit more time at.
Let's go over a little history here for people to get them set. with what we're talking about. Utah Beach is the westernmost of the 5 landing beaches of Normandy.
Utah and Omaha are the 2 American ones. The other 3 are
gold Juno sword.
Right.
In the beginning, I think you're saying your vignette, this was not a planned beach, Utah Beach. It was added. And so in May of 1944, they had decided to add this beach, which gave them a whole nother month of planning. Originally, they were going to plan these invasions in May of 1944, but because they added more area, they had to wait to get more aircraft in, and they actually flew in 1,000 more aircraft. And thanks to the WASPs, we'll talk about that. The WASPs flew in these aircraft in America, got them to Indiana, and from Indiana they flew them straight to England.
Oh, wow.
It freed up 900 more pilots, male pilots, to fly these aircraft as well. So you have, again, this full all-in effort to have this invasion.
I was looking it up, because I try to fact check myself when I write these intros and these little mini stories. There was over 7,000 ships that were involved on the D-Day invasion or the D-Day landings. I literally can't comprehend that many ships out there. It's just mind-boggling.
It is. And when you think of 50 miles of beaches and they're going to add this, they're adding this.
And from a Navy perspective, right, from you and I, and from me, a former ship driver, surface warfare officer, 50 miles of beaches for 7,000 ships, that's not a lot of beach. No. You're concentrating a hell of a lot of naval power into 50 miles, which sounds like a lot, but when you're doing that many together, and people have seen the historic footage before and how close they are, there's a reason that they're all that close, because there's thousands upon thousands of them.
Exactly. What they're doing is they're basically, I don't think they're exactly bow to stern, but they're lining up in a way where they can fire onto the beaches and get inland enough to incapacitate the Germans. And so they get all these warships out there to line them up and do that. What is interesting about Utah Beach is between Utah and Omaha, it's very swampy and difficult to cross. So Utah is basically isolated. It's on its own out there. It doesn't really have that connection that the other beaches are going to have with each other. So the people who are landing at Utah are landing at Utah alone. And that is one of the reasons they're very supported by the airborne. And so the night of June 6, 1944, you're going to get the 82nd and the 101st Airborne, Band of Brothers, jumping right after midnight to start to help with the logistics of Utah Beach. Now, I don't know, I think we talked about this before. Normandy area is farmland. And because it's farmland, it floods.
Yeah, and intentionally. That's why people settled there, and that's what they use it for that. Yeah.
To fertilize the soil. They flood it. Well, the Germans, after they occupied it, intentionally flooded it. It was unusable farmland then, but it made it difficult logistically to get anything in and out except for a couple main roads.
Yeah, and as I said in the intro, this was not I'll call it the logical choice, the first logical choice for an invasion, right? The Germans were expecting them to land somewhere else, and they picked this spot because fortifications were a little bit less, even though the beachheads, as you're describing, are a little more difficult for an amphibious landing. But the Americans and the Allies were able to fake them out, draw their forces elsewhere so they could come land here at Normandy. And then even though the beaches were not ideal, it was ideal for many other reasons.
Yes.
For the Allies.
Like you said, espionage is happening. They're thinking they're going to go to the shortest distance. They're focusing all of their defense over there, the Germans.
Up at Calais.
Another thing that happens is Hitler goes to sleep the evening of June 5th to 6th and gives explicit instructions not to be woken up.
Which is crazy because I think the invasion was delayed a day just because of weather.
Because of weather, yes.
Which is somebody on high was looking out for the Allies.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly believe that too. And so because he said not to be woken up and because they started to take fire from midnight all the way into noon the next day, there's no orders for reinforcements coming in. They're just basically fighting. They're just being on the defensive. What you get at Utah Beach, One of the things I don't like, and I know it bothers me, and it shouldn't, is people say Utah Beach was at the easier beach to take.
I think the better way to phrase it is like it suffered the least casualties.
It did suffer the least casualties, but you have what they call conscripts defending Utah Beach, and conscripts are captured soldiers from other armies.
Yeah, didn't you say that it was like the Polish?
It was the Polish.
Yeah.
And so usually with conscripts, which is entirely fair, they're not going to fight as hard because they don't want to die for a country that's not theirs.
Sure. If all of a sudden it looks like they're going to get overtaken, they're going to throw their hands up.
And that is what happened in a lot of scenarios with different areas of Utah Beach, because mostly conscripts were defending the area because, again, it wasn't on the radar to be a place where the Allied attack was going to happen. You have the airborne coming in right after midnight. You get the first landings happen quickly, 4 waves at 0630. Now, this is going to be the 4th Infantry. You're going to get Teddy Roosevelt Jr., General, and part of that first wave. He's there on the beach.
He's the senior guy.
And he notices a very easy way to get onto the beach. And because he notices how easy this is, he diverts people to that area. Now, because he's diverted them to that area, it leaves the other areas that they had intended open. But what it does is there was a current that had pushed a lot of those obstacles onto the beach. And so when they're landing combat engineers, and this is a huge combat engineer wave, these first couple waves.
And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's a memorial to the combat engineers there at Utah Beach, which we showed in the video.
They're so important. Combat engineers, they basically disarm the obstacles. So they're blowing up the bombs. They're pushing out the hedgehogs. Anything that's there to block the beaches and make the beaches unusable, they're getting rid of that.
So was Teddy Roosevelt Jr., was he telling them, hey, look at all this?
Yes. And because that current had pushed them all in, that first wave got there. He saw how easy it was to get to that area. He had them land there, and they basically just started clearing out obstacles. So it was really great. First wave is at 0630. Second wave is at 0635. Third wave is at 0645.
Wow.
And so they're getting very lucky. By 0830, you have combat engineers coming on right and left because the tide is about to come in, and they want to get all of those obstacles. So by the tide comes in at 10:30, they've cleared the obstacles. So really by noon, they've captured the beach. Like, they've moved ahead and gotten the beach, and they're able to start landing tanks and start landing the big guns. And when you're talking about all these vessels, all these tanks are coming on board. And how many vessels does it take to bring a tank on board, right? So you have to realize that these vessels are not these huge vessels. They're these LCACs and these Higgins boats that are bringing on all of the jeeps and tanks and all the logistics that are needed to move an army into France. And that's why 7,000 are needed to really start to move. And that's not all 7,000 right at Utah.
Right.
What you get is over 1,000 aircraft are going to start bombing inland. And you're going to get the 82nd, 101st Airborne who are coming in to, again, secure these roads, these logistical roads. They don't want the Nazis to take out these roads because they need these roads to move these tanks.
As well as like a bunch of the bridges, which if you've ever watched Band of Brothers is like a kind of a key thing that they're always like taking or defending or whatever.
And we'll talk about Dick Winters in that first night takes out 4 guns on a major road and does it with minimal men, not even his own men. And it's still studied today. So when you think of all of these tanks, Sherman's army, my grandfather drove a tank. My grandfather was on Utah Beach. This is all coming from these boats. And so you need roads to get them into theater. And when everything is flooded, farmland flooded, very few roads are available, and they are such high importance that they were afraid the Nazis were going to blow them up or take them out. And that's why the airborne went in first behind that area. And you're going to get the first town is right by Utah Beach that's liberated by the Americans. It's St. Mary Iglesia, which we will have a whole episode about that.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, you and your time there, even though I'll call this, it's still one of the major beaches. It's not Omaha, where they saw 10 times, if not more, 20 times the amount of casualties, but they still have memorials there to combat engineers, which you got to see. And I think there was like a Navy memorial that you saw up top with a World War II veteran. He was up there like signing autographs and stuff like that. That was really cool.
That was really cool. So what they have there is they have an example of a Higgins boat. They have the lone sailor, because you're going to get, the Navy really makes their name there. What is very interesting, an untold story of Utah Beach, is this is really the birth of the Navy SEALs. You're going to get the very first combat Navy SEAL guys.
The frogmen.
Frogmen coming on board, scubaing. So this is really, when you think of, they have a whole story to them now at the museum. These very first, what do they call it here? Ancestors of the Navy SEALs. So it's just very cool to see these guys for the first time doing this. But the 4th Infantry lands 21,000 troops and really only lose 200 men.
Yeah.
It is amazing. And the airborne arriving by parachute and glider number additional 14,000, but they lose 2,500. And we've talked about this before. Why? Because, again, people were scattered and not landing where they had intended to. And then they were very exposed early on. And so you have the men who have high casualties there. About 700 men were lost in those engineering units. And that memorial is to those men.
I thought that was really cool because it's a part of military operations that not a lot of people think of. And it was really neat to see that highlighted, not only there at Utah Beach, but we got to highlight that a little bit on our video. So if someone were to visit Utah Beach, some of the things they could see, obviously you could go to the beachhead, right? You could see it during different tide times. I think it was relatively high tide when you were there.
Yes.
And
everyone's going to go to Utah Beach, because that's where the big museum is.
Oh, that's right.
When you're talking about the American D-Day Museum, it's at Utah Beach. So you will visit Utah Beach. Plus, if you want to see the Dick Winters statue, it's on your way into Utah Beach, right? So I want everyone to remember airborne is jumping in protection of Utah Beach. That's what you're going to see driving into Utah Beach. You're going to see the big museum at Utah Beach, but a ton of really great statues and markers. Like I said, the lone sailor, the Higgins boat, a big statue to the Navy. And
there was the airborne, there was the 101st memorial that you saw. Like it was right next to the field where a lot of them landed.
Yes.
And you guys went out and got to go see that. And it's showing, right, the little screaming eagle on it with the names on there. And it had the American flag. And it was a really cool little memorial right there where they were landing.
So on our way to Utah Beach, you can stop there. Anyone who's seen Band of Brothers, this is Dick Winters' big moment. And to me, it's his big moment. Further on down the road will be the Dick Winters statue, which is a big statue of him personally. And then a little bit further will be Utah Beach and the museum. We'll do a whole separate episode of the museum. When you get to the markers that are along the way, it'll walk you through all the names of all the ships that were out there and how far away from the land they were.
Yeah, that was neat.
And then there's a whole kind of, it's like a bunker, but it's also like ceremoniously dedicated to Teddy Roosevelt Jr. because he is the highest ranking person on Utah Beach that day, because he's part of the first wave, because what he does logistically is so instrumental to capturing Utah Beach very early. There's a whole area dedicated to him.
Yeah, it looks like they took a bunker and just converted it into a memorial/mini museum.
Yes, exactly. And he dies about a little over a month later. He's going to have a heart attack. He's buried at Omaha Beach, but this is the beach where he really makes his name. And so there's a whole memorial to him there. So you can walk through all of those things outside of the museum. And the day I was there, the tide was in the day I was there. There was not a lot of beach. And someone had placed a flag, a 48 star flag and a helmet. There were some men dressed as the 101st Airborne.
That was really neat. There was even one guy that kept running in and out of the surf, and he was doing it just so people could take pictures of him.
Just so people could take pictures of him.
Which was cool. I mean, it was a little cheesy, But it was neat because even for the video, you had been able to get a shot of him from far away, and so it gave you that feel like you're there at Utah Beach and you saw someone dressed a World War II soldier storming the beach. It was actually neat.
It was neat. Just remember that the tide was in, if you see that video, but also remember that gentleman was wearing boots and utilities and he was carrying his rifle. That was it. And I think he had his helmet on. And if you can imagine being waterlogged and doing that across a beach, if you've ever tried to jog on a beach with all that gear on.
With 60 pounds of gear, 80 pounds of gear.
Imagine what that was like. So to me, it's one of those things when you see it in person, in reality, it brings you like, wow, what these men were doing was really important. But I took sand from Utah Beach. That was the beach I took sand from since my grandfather was there. And it was important for me to be there again. And we'll talk more about the museum, but the museum is just amazing there. The story plus the artifacts that they have in there. But that was in a beautiful beach. The day I had was just gorgeous. And just to be able to stand out there and to remember those men on that location. I think I was there the day after D-Day. So I was there June 7th. And for me, my grandfather landed on Utah Beach June 10th, 1944. I was there June 7th, 2024. So for me, almost 80 years from when my grandfather hit the sand. So for me, it was very important to be there. I just wanted to say, too, what was Utah Beach named after? Eisenhower was put in charge of Operation Overlord and Operation Neptune. Like, he's in charge of the whole planning. He gives Bradley the specifics of the amphibious assault landings on the beaches. And Bradley, at first they're called, I think Utah's called X-Ray. And the story goes, I have not seen it directly cited, but there are some people who do cite this, that General Bradley, Omar Bradley, was asking the two privates in his London office as they were typing where they were from. And one of them was from Omaha, Nebraska, and one of them was from Provo, Utah. And so he named the two beaches Omaha and Utah, the shortest names of the two that they said, after those two privates who was working for him as he was planning the assault. That's where the name Utah comes from.
Yeah, it was really neat. And it's one of those ones that me personally, I'm looking forward to visiting one day, sometime in the future. And hopefully if you're listening, maybe you're listening to this on an airplane ride out to France to go visit it yourself.
I will say, if you're going to visit, St. Mary Glass is the town right behind Utah Beach. Wonderful town. Love Americans. Great place to visit. Great little courtyard area. Lots of food. Lots of things to do there, and hotels. Also, Caraton, which is between Omaha and Utah Beach, is another town where lots of people stayed, because you can visit both towns easily from that town.
Yeah, very cool. June 5th, 1944. A cold pre-dawn chill hung heavy in the air over the English Channel. Below, a colossal armada stretched as far as the eye could see. Thousands of ships, large and small, their hulls dark against the inky waters, formed a silent, menacing leviathan. Aboard the flagship, General Dwight D. Eisenhower paced the bridge. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders. Tomorrow, he would unleash the largest amphibious invasion in history. A gamble of epic proportions. It could be either the turning point of the war or a catastrophic failure. In the bowels of the ships, men prepared for the ordeal ahead. They checked and rechecked their equipment, their minds a whirlwind of fear, anticipation, and grim determination. Some prayed. Others wrote letters. While many simply tried to sleep. A fitful rest before the storm. On the beaches of Normandy, the Germans were oblivious to the impending cataclysm. Their defenses, though formidable, were not impenetrable. Coastal batteries, machine gun nests, and tank obstacles lined the shore, but intelligence suggested that they were not expecting an invasion on this scale. As darkness enveloped the channel, the final preparations were made. Paratroopers adjusted their harnesses, their faces painted with camouflage. Landing craft were loaded to capacity with men and equipment. Aircraft carriers launched their fighters, ready to provide air cover. The tension was palpable. Every man knew what tomorrow would bring: bloodshed, sacrifice, and hopefully, victory. As the first rays of dawn approached, a hush fell over the Armada. The long-awaited moment was drawing near. Tomorrow was D-Day.
We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.